Welcome to the Room of Lives. I am your host, Neil. Today we are joined by Khristián Méndez, who is from Guatemala and currently a PhD student in performance arts at the University of Texas at Austin. He is a theater director and has taught undergrad classes in theater history, theory, and practice, including Indian and Sanskrit performance. I met Khristián in Seneca Falls Co-op in Austin, where I moved just as the COVID-19 pandemic started. During the pandemic, we shared a makeshift office in the house, played Settlers of Catan for hours on end, and when he would teach Spanish undergrad language classes online, I stayed in a corner of the room and learned almost a whole course's worth for free. At some point, I learned that Khristián has studied the intersection of scientific narrative and theater, and I also realized that he has had an interesting life. So naturally, I sat him down for a podcast one day. This is that podcast being published almost 2 years later, because that's how things are in my world, in case you haven't caught on yet. So in this first part, Khristián tells me about Guatemala, its nature, history, and economy, and its peoples, culture, and languages. He also paints a picture of his family and growing up and early education. All right, Khristián. Well,
all right.
Yeah, thanks a lot for agreeing to come on my podcast. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So the reason that I wanted to talk to you is that I get a sense that there's a lot of interesting things for me to learn here. There are like dimensions that you have experienced and that you can share. So the first thing that I would really like to know is about Guatemala, where you were born. I'm in general very curious about other countries, and I like to travel a lot. So can you paint a picture of Guatemala for me? I've never been.
Yeah. It's a very small country compared to the US. And to India, we have 14 million people. Give or take a few. Interestingly, the city of Austin and the city of Guatemala have roughly the same number of inhabitants. So it's about, my home city is about the same size as Austin, in terms of people. There's a lot of ethnic groups, like in India. Not nearly as many, but quite a few for how small we are. There's 4 large groups. One of the official classification is that there's 4 large groups. Which is Maya, and Maya really is just like a little bit racist way to think about 24 to 27 different linguistic groups that have just been grouped under one, being you're all Maya. And then there's Xinkas, which is another group of indigenous people that were there. They're about less than 5% of the population. Mayas are actually around. The official census that there are less than 50%, but I think officially there probably are, and there's probably more Maya people than the other ethnic groups. The third one is Garifunas, which is Afro-Latinos who live in the Caribbean. And the last one is my ethnic group, which is honestly the best way to define it is none of the above. It is primarily, or it is significantly white, white Guatemalans. Or the way a Twitter person defined it as that Guatemalan. Yeah, white Guatemalan. But there's also a lot of other people, like my aunts and a lot of my close relatives, my dad, who are in that ethnic group, but they're not white skinned. And so it's complex because that ethnic group, people can transition into it. They can leave behind their indigenous heritage and stop wearing their traditional costumes and learn speaking Spanish and in English, and then change their last names and then become part of that ethnic / cultural group.
The Guatemalan.
The name of it is Ladino.
Latino?
Ladino with a
Ladino.
D. With a D.
Is this specific to Guatemala?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
We
okay.
never, for better or for worse, we never really embraced the discourse of like mestizaje, like the mixed races.
Yeah.
Some people use the word mestizo to refer to themselves, but unlike Mexico or Bolivia, like we never really embraced it. We have the word Ladino, and yeah, it's kind of complicated. As you can imagine, there's been a lot of conflict between these ethnic groups, often provoked by outside forces. There was a war that went from 1960 to 1996. There was 36 years of war, and that was because it's a complicated thing, but essentially it was supposed to be between like the left and the right, and the right was the government and the left were the communists, with air quotes, which were associated with the indigenous peoples. So that was really bloody, and it ended in 1996, so it was still happening when I was born.
Wait, when were you born?
1992.
You were born in 1992. Oh shit, I forget that I'm a little older than you.
Yeah, you're older than me. And so, I'm 27. And
Yeah.
so...
Damn, I always keep thinking that you're older than me.
No. Yeah, and so the... So that was really intense, and there's all kinds of like political repercussions today because of that war. And then we're still a very divided country economically. Our Gini coefficient is higher than India's, actually.
That is the coefficient that measures inequality, right?
Inequality of income. What percentage of the population holds the top like 5% of the income, and then what percentage was the lowest 5%? And we are like on the, at least the last time I checked, which is admittedly a few years ago, we were in like the top 10 most unequal countries in the world, above India, which like shocked me because the inequality in India, I feel like I saw it so blatantly, but I feel like what that means is that in my country it's equally blatant, it's just not visible. They will have money to lead much more private lives. And so, so that's it. Not a lot of people speak English, although that's also changing. But when I left 10 years ago, less than 5% of the population spoke English. Excuse me, spoke English. There's one state university and then a lot of private universities. The state one is the best in like medicine and a couple of other fields, law, but then the private ones are just better resourced. And that's also part of the inequalities. It's so expensive to go to university in Guatemala, like relative to the income that people make. So it's a very unequal country, but we do know how to make fun of like my aunts and almost everybody, like there's just...
See, I might be wrong here, and this might be a stereotype, but I have this stereotype that Latin people kind of know how to have fun. This is in my limited experience of like Mexican people, Colombian people, and like people from various other Latin American countries.
It might have been the people that you've met, like because of where you've been and who you've been with. But I do think like we have a more, I don't know, I think Americans know how to have fun as well. I think like they have so many holidays and like you see the tradition of like HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and like their festivities. I feel like it's just a different, maybe perhaps more relatable to you. But I think Americans know how to have fun as well. But yeah, it's just what I was getting at though is that like we know how to make fun. I think it's a slightly different thing having fun with like making fun of our circumstances, and so like all kinds of what's the word I want to use? Yeah, it's just things are so fucked up that sometimes like the only thing you can do is laugh about it. And so I think that I would identify that as being like a defining feature for us, especially because we're not particularly nationalistic, and so it's very easy for us to make fun of our own country. Sometimes in ways that are not very useful. And even like the people who want to uphold the values of like Guatemala, like are just so like are seen as like too uptight and too serious. Versus here, I feel like if you ask most people in the house like, do you believe in America as like a concept, I feel like more people would say yes. And so we're just a little bit more, the idea of the nation of Guatemala is just not really steeped into, at least publicly. Maybe in private it is, but so that's I think interesting. There's a lot of natural beauty. We're in the Ring of Fire, so a lot of volcanoes, a lot of earthquakes. I grew up with so many natural disasters. Like one of my earliest memories is seeing ash rain from the sky in 1998 because of a volcanic eruption. When I was coming back from school, and it was so cool. It was awful. Like the villages near the volcano were destroyed, but yeah, earthquakes, volcanoes, tropical storms, hurricanes, no tornadoes, and no wildfires either. But yeah, you grew up used to a lot of extremes when you live in Guatemala.
Yeah.
A lot of extremes.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. What was like you grew up in a city, in Guatemala City.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the terrain like? Is it like pretty flat? I've been thinking of asking you this question, like what is the picture of
No, it's very mountainous. So the Rocky Mountains in the US we call it Sierra Madre, which is the like mother mountain range when it goes through Central America, and then that same mountain range becomes the Andes. So Guatemala City is actually smacked in the middle of the mountains. And so
it's supposed to be like the longest mountain range in the world.
If you count all of it as one, I think so. But I don't know how many people do. But yeah, so Guatemala City is in a valley in between those mountains.
Yeah.
So like the part of town that my mom lives in, because she lives on the mountain, and she also was born on the mountain, like outside of the city. You can see the city. You can look down onto the city. Pretty well, and sometimes you can see the clouds really well. Like it's very, very mountainous. We have a lot of cloud forests in the upper parts. So,
and you mentioned that these Maya people, you said there's like 20 or so linguistic groups are clubbed together. So does that mean that in addition to like some people speaking English and maybe most people speaking Spanish, that there are that many languages in Guatemala?
Yeah, and the politics of what is recognized as a language, it's politics. Like the reason that like Norwegian and Danish are different languages is because of politics. But like they're
really?
Yeah, yeah, Norwegian, Danish, and what's the other one? There's a third language, but yeah, that's what happened in North. Yeah, and that's a different thing. But yeah, that's just an aspect of linguistics that. My friends who are linguists said like the difference between a dialect and a language, it's politics. So you have I studied one of those languages, and like from that branch of the family, I think it's either Cachiquel or Sutui. There's four. It's Cachiquel, Cachiquel, Quiche, Utuhil, and there's one more that
you're making some sounds that are very new to me.
Yeah, exactly. To heal, it's like you do it, and then there's like a cut is like to heal, and then the like cachical is it. Anyway, they're probably something you can make, but so that branch, the like quiche, cachical, to heal, and there's one more. I forget what it is. Those four languages are like relatively intelligible to each other, but not really. It's like the difference between Spanish and Portuguese. Probably even more, maybe more like Spanish and Dutch. But then you have like Okomam or Chi that are like completely different, but they're all rooted under one group, which is like Maya, which is like bullshit. And so so there's a lot of languages, and that was one of the things that when I went to India, I was so inspired that like to see that like in Maharashtra, kids learn Marathi, Hindi, and in the urban schools English. So it's like you see there is a model in which people do learn more than one language. Now in there's this thing called the national base curriculum, which is like the standards for the whole country. Teachers are supposed to teach Spanish and an indigenous language, but the majority of teachers, including my own family, just does not know how to speak it. And so kids are supposed to be learning an indigenous language in school, but it's not implemented because of a number of reasons. And so
does your family or any part of your family have some indigenous language? Or
I'm sure way up, not that I know of from my mother's side. They're the reason that I'm fairly white. My great-grandfather or my great-great-grandfather came from Spain, and he kind of like always married like white. Like he came and then they had a daughter. I think it was my great-grandfather. He came, and then my great-grandmother, Mamalita, she was white, and then they had my grandfather Romeo, who was also white, and he had blue eyes, And then he had my mom, who's also white. And then my dad's side is a little more complicated because I don't know. I'm an IV fertilization baby.
Oh, you are?
And
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't know. I've never really met my biological father. And then my dad, like the guy who raised me, he's brown. He's very much brown. But and his mom is brown. His dad is not. So my grandma, I'm sure, has some indigenous roots on that side, but I don't know from where.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was growing up in Guatemala like? What was, how many siblings did you have? And yeah, I'm just like trying to get a picture of your life.
I have a lot of siblings, but I grew up with two. I think I mean, my dad was in the army, and he served in the army during the war, the conflict. Which the 36 years of like internal armed conflict, and so I grew up exposed to a lot of military culture, but I never really liked it. I was kind of like a solitary kid. Like my brothers would play with each other, and like they would ride their bicycles and like build things, and I was never really interested. Like I would read books, I would play Legos, like I would just spend a lot of time by myself, and I was like never really like minded it actually. And so I was there. I was okay student. Actually, there were some years I was a really bad student. My third grade especially, I hated. It's funny to remember that now. And then in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, I started to get my shit together a little bit more. By the time I graduated high school, I was like valedictorian of my class, but that was definitely not where I started. And in fact, I like failed the class my like second to last year of school. Or no, not fail, but like I got a really low mark, like a 67 or something like that. And so I was there till I was 16. I changed schools only once. Well, that's not true. I did my preschooling, I jumped around a bunch, but then from like kindergarten up until high school, I only changed schools once. And that was pretty intense because I moved to an all-boys Catholic military school for 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. We only have 11 grades in Guatemala.
From a school that was not all boys, not military,
it was
or
like
not Catholic,
not religious, co-ed, super chill, also way cheaper than the Catholic one, and so that was a big change. I really, really struggled with that, but it also made me realize how important my learning environment was. I think if I hadn't gone through that, I probably wouldn't have appreciated my learning environment for what it was. So I wanted to get the fuck out. And so I also, like, by the time I got that old, I wasn't super happy at home or feel super comfortable for a lot of reasons. And then the opportunity to go study abroad came up. And I pursued it. And then, I left.
Okay, feel free to not answer this question, but like, was it difficult for you? Okay, was it difficult for a gay person like you to be in that Catholic military school? That I imagine that would be kind of conservative or
very conservative. It's funny because it wasn't like it was in that all the things you said. It was conservative. People were bullied. I was bullied, but I also bullied. And I was really smart, and so like even if people bullied me for being effeminate, like I still like told them their shit. And like I knew, or like I acted as if I was better than them because my grades were a lot better. Also because I worked a lot harder than most of my classmates. And so, I kind of like, I did have some kind of like social power within that. And most of my, like there was one of my friends who was out there, and like when we were in high school, and he got bullied, but also like he was the proof that you could go to that school and like not get killed and be who you were. Him and another guy who, I mean, and they did not have it easy, but also like they lived their lives, and some of the dudes who were bullies like wanted to be friends with them, and so it was much more complex than just it was or it wasn't. yeah, there's more stuff, but it involves other people's stories that are not mine to tell.
Yeah.
So I can't share that, but there were ways that we made it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a kid, what were the kinds of things that you were into? Like, what were your hobbies or interests?
Reading.
Yeah.
Absolutely reading.
Okay.
My aunts who taught me how to read, I learned how to read before I turned 4. And once I learned, like at some point, like my aunt always tells the story that there was this one day that she was just like, she didn't know what to do because I had read every book in the house and she didn't have anything else to give me.
Yeah.
And I would sit with the encyclopedias and just read them. Literally just read them. Like going thing by, back when they were like giant dictionaries.
Yeah.
I would just read them. There was this other encyclopedia like in Carta. There was something I would just sit and read it.
Yeah.
And I still remember a lot of the
I read some encyclopedias when I was a kid.
Yeah, I just read them.
Yeah.
And then I would go to my mom and just tell them like random facts. Just because. And I'd be like, Mom, did you know da 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 da? And she reminds me, and so she started calling me like her like 2-footed encyclopedia. Because I just knew a lot of random shit. But I like reading. And I tricked my parents into thinking that I could read before I could read. Like I memorized this book, and I would like read it, and then one day my dad busted me. He was like, "What does it say here?" And I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell him, but I don't know why. I've just always been interested in reading. And I also wasn't particularly outgoing. I would stand up in front of the class because I think when I was in high school, I began to see like leadership, like how important leadership was. Like in elementary school, I think I was just more of like whatever, just like a regular student. But then I started to become more interested in leadership. But I hated group work, and I hated being the person in front of the class. Like I would do it, but it would make me to this day it makes me really anxious and like really, really hate it. So and I was interested in science too. Like in Guatemala you do a degree in high school where you choose whether you're going to focus on humanities or in sciences, and mine was in sciences, and I liked it. I loved chemistry. I had gotten admission to medical school in Guatemala City before I left, and so I was really, really interested in sciences. I had some interest in art, but not like this is when I was older, like I watched Grey's Anatomy, and I liked like animated movies and stuff like that, but I wasn't making anything. And I really struggled in my art classes for a long time until I had a professor in high school who she taught us like, it was called industrial arts. It was basically like shop class where we would like build things. And she was teaching us how to make a lamp, and she asked us to design our own lamp based on an animal. And mine, I remember very well, it was a stegosaurus. So I made like 5 little light bulbs, and I built the arms, and it was just like a piece of metal, and it was really rudimentary, but I did it. And Miss Coralia, she gave me a translucent colored paper to put on each of the 5, and that was like, I felt so proud that I had come up with that and I had done that. That was like the first time that I was just like, oh, I could do this. And I also really like languages. I loved my English classes since I was a little kid. I had a really good teacher when I was in elementary school. I still remember her. She had braces. And I was always interested in languages. Really, really interested in them. But yeah.
I'm glad you joined us today in the Room of Lives. In the second part, Khristián shares his experiences of leaving Guatemala at age 16 and going on scholarship to an international high school in India and traveling through the country, and how a foreigner like him was perceived by Indians.